The Obama administration has concluded, on the basis of new evidence, also contributed by British and French intelligence services, that the Assad regime has been using some amount of chemical weapons, including sarin, in the Syrian civil war. The president is now preparing to send arms to the rebels. The change in the White House's position appears to bring it more into line with that of Britain and France. So what's behind it? On Monday of last week, David Cameron made a statement to Parliament on the decision to lift the EU arms embargo on the Syrian opposition. He said lifting the embargo did, quote, not mean that we have made any decision to send arms, but we now have the flexibility to respond if the situation continues to deteriorate. 2 days later, French President François Hollande said that mounting evidence of the use of chemical weapons in Syria obliges the international community to act. Foreign Secretary William Hague, he was in Washington this week meeting with his US counterpart John Kerry. He's new to the job. Speaking after their talks, he said, "We cannot turn away from Syria and its people, and we will have to be prepared to do more to save lives." And yesterday, announcing Mr. Obama's could-be U-turn, certainly change of heart, his decision, US Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes said that the use of chemical weapons crosses clear red lines that have existed within the international community for decades. President Obama's decision has been welcomed by former presidential candidate and Navy captain, a man who was campaigning to arm the Syrian rebels, Senator John McCain.
I applaud the president's decision, and I appreciate it. But the President of the United States had better understand that just supplying weapons is not going to change the equation on the ground of the balance of power. These people of the Free Syrian Army need weapons and heavy weapons to counter tanks and aircraft. They need a no-fly zone, and Bashar Assad's air assets have to be taken out and neutralized. And we can do that without risking a single American airplane.
Senator McCain on the floor of the Senate in Washington, D.C. We're now joined by the Conservative MP Brooks Newmark. He's travelled to Syria a number of times. He's met with and had extensive talks with not just President Assad, but the president's wife, and he's written about these encounters. We're also joined by Jack Straw, who was a Foreign Secretary of our country between 2001 and 2006. Welcome. To you both. Let me come to you first, Brooks Newmark. I mean, Syria is awash with arms already. Why would sending more make any difference?
Well, it's pretty much an asymmetrical war with a huge amount of the heavy weaponry on one side, with both the Russians and the Iranians supported with Hezbollah. They've got about 16,000 bits of heavy artillery, they've got an air force and so on. On the other side, they've got mainly small arms. But the better armed of the opposition at the moment happens to be Jabhat al-Nusra and the other more Islamists. So what's happening is members of the Free Syria Army are flaking away to the better armed opposition. I think what we need to do is to try to stop that, support General Idris, who represents the majority of the opposition, and to do what we can to help him and the opposition bring Assad down. Let
me put some of the technical problems with that aside for the moment, but come straight to the issue. If the heavier arms are with the Assad forces, it would seem that the only thing that could be a game changer would be if the Americans were to provide the rebels with heavier arms themselves, by which I mean anti-tank weapons and anti-aircraft weapons. Yes. Is that what you want the president to do?
That's what I want a coalition to do, not just the United States, but I think the UK and France working with the international community. I think just sending in small arms, perhaps better small arms, would be welcomed by the FSA, but this is not where I think the government is yet today, or even the Americans. I would certainly send tank busters and anti-aircraft weapons in.
What do you say to that, Jack Straw?
Well, I'm concerned. I'm not saying rule out such weaponry at any stage, but I'm really worried that such an escalation, which would inevitably mean, I think Brooks would accept this, that there would be Western boots on the ground.
I disagree.
Well, because
that's where you and I disagree.
You can't use this stuff. Okay? You might be able to use an AK rifle just after a couple of hours training, but this is really sophisticated stuff. They've got to be trained up.
So we'd have to send, the West would have to send
somehow or other. Now, my view is this. We've got this G8 coming up. It's really, Russia is going to be round the table. I don't think it's helpful to try and get an accommodation with Russia and get the Geneva II talks off the ground to start speaking about a further escalation. We've seen it's very, I mean, I can talk about this, it's very easy to get into military action, much more difficult to withdraw from it. And if America and the UK and France is not careful, you get dragged into a proxy war. My own judgment is this, that at any stage, any level of armaments, the Syrian government are likely to have access to heavier and more effective weaponry because they've got them already, they've got highly trained personnel, and they've got Russia and the Iranians seeing this, for quite understandable reasons, by the way, as an existential crisis for them, as well as for the Syrians, in the way that the West does not see this as existential.
Well, let me put that point. The risk, I mean, first of all, we've had no indication out of Washington that the administration is prepared to provide these heavier arms.
Correct, you're absolutely right.
All the signs I've
right.
seen for has been about lighter arms.
Yes.
But supposing we did go down this road of the heavier arms, every indication I've seen out of Moscow is that they're prepared to provide heavier arms. And we'll end up in a war by proxy in Syria.
Well, I think I'm all for negotiation. Negotiation has to be the ultimate outcome here. But for 2 years now, we've been talking to Lavrov and Putin and indirectly to the Assad regime. They have had no incentive whatsoever to come to the negotiating table. I think the message by lifting the arms embargo, and I think tactically the Foreign Secretary was right to push for this, is that when you come to Geneva II, we are serious. All options now remain on the table if you do not negotiate in seriousness. So I'm not saying that heavy arms will go, but in just dealing with Jack's question, in dealing with Geneva II, I think this sends a powerful message that we are serious now and you should take it seriously.
But what do you do if Mr. Assad says, if you're going to send heavy weapons to the rebels, I'm not coming to Geneva?
Yeah.
Well, you know, he probably wasn't coming anyway. So I don't think.
So,
well,
so instead
think,
he gets on the plane to Moscow and says, "Can I have a few more MiGs?" And,
well,
anti-tank busters.
From what I know, and Jack can contradict me if he wishes. From what I know of Assad, and I've dealt with him for 5 years, I think he feels strong when he is unopposed. But like with any bully, that if he thinks there is a real threat to him, he is more likely, I'm not saying he will, but he is more likely to come to the negotiating. And certainly the Russians, who to date have been all talk and no delivery with respect to Assad, I think by at least sending a signal through lifting the arms embargo, with the US now in tune with us on this, sends a strong message: come to Geneva II, negotiate seriously, and if you do not, then all options remain on the table.
Jack Straw, you went to a memorial service in 2005 in Srebrenica.
I certainly did.
You said, "We mourn the thousands killed here.
Yeah.
We recall the chilling words of Edmund Burke that the only thing that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing.
Yeah.
For it is to the shame of the international community that this evil took place under our noses and we did nothing like enough."
Yeah.
Many more people have been killed in Syria than in Srebrenica.
No, you're absolutely right, and it was one of the most chilling and appalling days that I've ever spent anywhere. The difficulty here is that you have to make these judgments on the basis of the facts as you find them. These analogies, historical analogies, are important, and indeed I deployed them both in respect of Iraq and Afghanistan, but they are not sufficient. Of course, I'm as concerned as Brooks, and I don't for a second doubt the commitment of William Hague, the Foreign Secretary, in facing what incredibly difficult decisions, which is why I've never criticised him for those.
There's kind of no good options in this
No,
situation.
there are no good options. To say there's a very fine calculation here about whether suddenly increasing the arms to the rebels would or would not bring the Russians to the table. But the last point I would make, where I think we have got to see a shift in policy by the US and the UK and France, is we've got to reach out to the Iranians. There's no point pretending they don't exist. There are 80 million people next to Syria. They are of fundamental importance in what's happening in Syria. But also,
you tried to reach out to the Iranians for almost a decade on nuclear arms and got nowhere.
Well, we didn't get nowhere.
Well, we didn't stop the program.
It did, well, and we don't know whether they have got a program. But what I do know, no, we don't. And there's never been a smoking gun.
Do you have some doubts that Iran is developing a nuclear bomb?
I've always had doubts, and so let me say, as the intelligence community in the United States, its national intelligence estimate in 2007, never subsequently contradicted, said that their assessment was that Iran had been trying to develop a nuclear weapons capability, but had abandoned that. So the Iranians are incredibly difficult to deal with. There are often
They're having an election.
So you think their centrifuges have stopped?
No,
They've stopped that whole thing with centrifuges then?
Look, there are other reasons.
Mr. Straw has answered the ground. Let's come back to Syria. I was interested in what you said.
It's a subject for
another discussion.
What I know, however, is that the moderates in Iran were fatally undermined by President Bush calling them part of the axis of evil, which pulled the rug from Khatami. What I also know is if you want a deal over Syria, you've got to accept the reality. Russia's got to be around the table. So has Iran, and Iran needs to be invited to this.
I read your article in the Daily Mail, which, as a result, it was a fascinating article because when you asked Mr. Assad what were his war aims, he quite bluntly said it's the preservation of the regime.
Yeah, no, in fact, way before the war started, when I first met him in 2006, and I asked him, you know, what is it you care about most? And it's regime survival, was the first thing that he said. When I asked him subsequently, when the war in Iraq was going on, you know, why are you letting people through your border to attack our soldiers, to attack American soldiers and so on? He said, look, if I don't let them through the border, they are going to turn on me and attack me. If they want to go get themselves killed by your soldiers, that's up to them. The third thing he said to me was with respect to Hezbollah. He said, I'm not strong enough to take the Israelis on directly. I'm weak economically and militarily, he said. But I'd rather use a proxy like Hezbollah to put pressure on Israel in order so that I can get the Golan Heights back.
Isn't your problem not arguing with us or with the people watching, but with your own party? Because as I understand it, it's unlikely there'll be a majority in the Commons for this, and the Prime Minister has indicated that there will be a vote on this. Labour's position seems pretty much to be opposed to...
Highly sceptical.
Very sceptical, I think. I mean, we've had Douglas Alexander on the programme, and he's made that clear. The Lib Dems, I think a lot of them will fall into that category, and a lot of your own members don't seem to support you. So we don't have a majority.
Yeah, I sort of feel a little bit like in 12 Angry Men. I think it's up to us to persuade the
Which
merits.
One are you?
I'll let you figure that one out.
He's very angry.
That I think it's up to those of us who believe it is morally the right thing to do to persuade our colleagues. Now, most of our colleagues are not unpersuadable. They're not taking a hard line. I think what they're saying is, look, we've been through Afghanistan, we've been through Iraq. Our constituents, the people who are listening to this programme, are very concerned that we don't want to go through the same thing again. Let us hear the full debate. Let us hear the merits of the argument. If you can persuade us, then maybe we will accept that.
We'll see if you can. Let's see if you persuaded our two journalists here. What on the issue, not the politics, but the issue, do we arm the rebels or don't we? What's the answer?
On the issue, I'm instinctively with Brooks because I can't bear to just shrug my shoulders and say, let this just carry on. I would like at least them to be able to have some answer to Assad's air superiority.
Yes.
I think it's possible to train them in Jordan. I don't think we necessarily have to send boots on the ground to Syria. But it's not easy, is it? And it's not obvious. And do I want Al-Qaeda to have anti-aircraft missiles? Not necessarily.
Nor do we.
No.
Okay.
Again, instinctively, absolutely agree. I mean, so if this was going on, in our country, this was happening to civilians, we'd immediately intervene. So why is it that different that it's taking place in a different country? But on the other hand, Brooks's example, when he talks about let's give the rebels surface-to-air missiles to shoot down the Syrian Air Force. I mean, we pay for intelligence services who spend a great deal of time trying to make sure that that technology doesn't spread around the region already. So I wish there was an easy answer.
We've come to the end of time. Just before you go, Jack Straw, very interesting you signed that letter about
I did.
communications with another 3 Labour and a Conservative Home Secretary. We were just slightly puzzled, though, that I mean, you can agree or disagree with Nick Clegg's position, but to kind of suggest he was in the pockets of Google seemed a strange thing to say.
Well, I mean, I think the point we were drawing attention to at the end of that letter was that it was slightly weird that the Liberal Democrats should, in this great debate, be siding with these unaccountable American behemoths rather than with the need for a greater counter-terrorist capability in this country. And I just make this point. We've always had legislation to allow the intelligence agencies and the police to look at communications data, which is not the contents of communications, but as it were, who texted who phoned who. What this is about is bringing up the legislation that I first introduced 14 years ago at a time when the internet was scarcely in existence and we never heard of Facebook. That's all it's about.
So for you, it's an update.
It's an update.
All right. Jack Straw, Brooks and Newmark, thank you.